You are now well into your analysis, and it's time to look at how we write up our results in a qualitative report. So we're looking at the following questions now. How does the data produced in qualitative research differ from the data produced in quantitative research? And what does this imply for the way we analyze and write up our results? What characterizes a good findings section of a qualitative paper, and what characterizes a bad findings section in a qualitative paper? Now let's look at what characterizes the writing in general in a qualitative paper. It's writing the findings section of a paper is actually part of the analysis process. It makes us think in new ways about the data and the connections between them and between the data and the broader literature. So we say that, in fact, a lot of the analysis is actually taking place while we are writing our research paper or research report. And in doing so, we must attend to the balance between description, analysis, and interpretation, and we'll look more into what this involves. In qualitative research, we should tell a story. It uses your analytical ideas related to theory to take the reader into what you have discovered in your data. And remember that we have talked about discovery as part of the qualitative research process before. We talked about data collection phase in particular, but this is also the case. Discovery is a big part also of the writing process. Suddenly you discover something in your data that you think is worthwhile pursuing. And another major point is that the findings should flow in a coherent manner. It shouldn't be a list of themes. If it's just this list of themes that are not properly connected, it's like your analysis is not complete. So make sure that when you present your findings, we move naturally from the one theme to the other. A theme interconnected. It's a story that you are actually telling through the way that you present your themes and your categories and your quotes to illustrate these themes. Now, we say that you should spend some time determining the central point or the storyline. And this doesn't come when you start looking at your data. It's something that develops as you go along. Because there are many stories that are available in your data set, and you must decide between you which story you want to tell. And a very good exercise is, when you've done that, is to start and just state the central point in one sentence and see if you can agree on that. The writing process helps us also find that central point. And when we find it, we organize our write-up around this central point. Now, in qualitative research, there are several stumbling blocks. And in the writing process and analysis, we risk having too much description, or we risk also putting too much emphasis on analysis. So let's look at these two traps, starting with descriptive excess, too much description. It's retelling the participants' stories rather than transforming them through analysis and interpretation means that there is descriptive excess. You are doing too little of analysis and interpretation. A description without getting to the point of what the data mean, actually. That's what it is. It's a very preliminary form of analysis where the researcher tries to get a sense of what is in the data rather than making sense of the data, if you understand that difference. Making sense of the data takes you to interpretation. and presentation of unconnected and undigested bits of description, followed by a quotation or two, sort of characterizes this descriptive excess, which means that you haven't spent enough time and effort to analyze and interpret your data. After getting the data, a major task is sort of getting rid of it by using data selectively just to exemplify, to illustrate, or illuminate the story that you want to tell. You can't include everything, all your data. You have to exclude a lot. You have to get rid of a lot of the data because heap data is not equal to rich description or to thick description, as Geertz has called it. Heap data is just a pile of data that is not properly analyzed. And as Sandelovsky says, by trying to retell everything, you end up showing nothing. You're so eager to document what your participants have said that you forget or you don't get time to do the real analysis of what this actually means. And heap data indicates that you're still unclear about your central point. So if you feel that you've got just too much data, go back and think, okay, what is your central point that you want to construct this story around? As Coffey and Atkinson has said, the generation of ideas can never be dependent on the data alone. In fact, data are there to think with and think about. Writing is a mode of discovery, as we said a few moments ago, that takes the researcher beyond their data. And in order to do that, you have to bring in some concepts and ideas. So the important ideas are not in the data themselves. Now that's descriptive excess. Too much description, too little analysis. But we can also go in the other trap of having too much analytical emphasis, too preoccupied with establishing credibility. Then the emphasis shifts to the mechanics of analysis rather than doing an analysis and trying to understand the material that you have collected. Like an example of this would be multiple word lists or data displays. And this comes at the expense of presenting a coherent description of events and, again, establishing the storyline. So we should be very careful to balance description, analysis, and interpretation in a qualitative research report. Now, description refers to the facts of the cases observed. Analysis refers to the breakdown and recombination of data that allows researchers to manage and see them in new ways. And interpretation refers to the new meanings that researchers create from their treatment of the data. So, the choice about what to emphasize must fit with the purpose and methods of your research. So what should be emphasized if the purpose was to explore how a particular group of women viewed aging or motherhood or childbirth or something of the sort? And what should be emphasized if the purpose was to explore how the same group of women manage aging or motherhood or childbirth? These are two different research questions which demands that you present the data in different ways. So with example 1, how do women view aging? We say that the data star. Women's views are represented with a minimum of interpretive intrusion from the researcher. The data is at the core here. The data are allowed to speak for themselves. In the second example, how do women manage aging? We say that it's an interpretation star. That means that it emphasizes interpretation based on theory. And in these kind of research, data plays more a supportive role. So you won't see subsequent quotes from interviews. You will see one or some few during the whole research paper, which is very different from the more descriptive kind, where you move from the one point to the other, illustrating it with an example of a research paper where data star, and another example of a research paper where interpretation star, is exemplified in the two research papers in the next learning activity. Now, when you're writing your report, remember that you need to avoid lists of codes and categories, and that you want to create a story that moves naturally from one theme to the next. Good luck with the writing process.